You're about to see a woodworking incident in which I receive a minor injury to my left hand while using my belt sander. Here's a look at the incident. The ends of my fingers on my left hand get caught by the sanding belt and pulled under the heavy workpiece. It seems like a lot of people talk about wood shop safety in terms of danger. For example, they'll say it's dangerous to remove the saw guard from your table saw. For me, it's more useful to think about woodworking safety in terms of risk. So for example, I would say removing the saw guard from my table saw increases my risk of injuring my hand through contacting the blade. I'm not a mathematician or a safety expert. Heck, I'm not even a woodworking expert. But there's a simple formula that I use to calculate risk in my workshop. It involves making an assessment of the likelihood that something could occur and multiplying it by an assessment of the consequence that I would receive if that event occurred. I found this technical paper on the internet, which might help me explain, particularly Table 2, which illustrates how likelihood and consequence relate regarding risk. You can see the greatest risk falls in the upper right corner, where both consequence and likelihood evaluations are the highest. I want to assess the risk in relation to my injury. So I took a look at this guide published by OSHA. For a nerd like me, it's interesting stuff. But for now, I just want to look at the safety hazard breakout box on page 8. I transpose this list to a spreadsheet. I then add in my assessment of these hazards that are specific to my belt sander. Thinking of risks rather than danger allows me to think of risk mitigation. In this case, I add engineering controls, which are physical changes to the machine or tools, and I add work practice controls, which are changes to the way I work. For example, for the point of operation hazard, I list push box and personal protective equipment as engineering controls, and keeping my hand away from the belt as a work practice control. First, I assume that no controls are in place. I assess the risk associated with each hazard by assigning a value from 1 to 10 for both likelihood and consequence. I want to stress that this is just my opinion, and not something anyone should take to heart. Second, I assess the risk using the same method, but this time assume that all controls are in place. Notice that the total risk score at the bottom is quite low compared to the score from the assessment with no controls. Finally, I assess my performance during the incident. I was not using push blocks, but I did have gloves on. And I did not keep my hands away from the belt. I had inadequate support for the material. I had no in-feed or outfeed support, and the fence was too small for the size of the workpiece. This means I had to put a lot of extra effort into controlling the workpiece. And I was forcing the material. I was using a somewhat dull 80 grit belt. It was not adequate for the amount of material I was trying to remove. The analysis in this table makes clear two things to me. One, I took on unnecessary risk. And two, there are specific changes I can make to reduce the risk associated with this task. So here are the changes I made. I added a simple scrap of 1/2-inch plywood to the fence to give me more support. I set up my workbench as an outfeed table. Not shown, but I swapped out the 80 grit belt for a fresh 60 grit belt. I feel much more comfortable now. So experiment with some other techniques that I've read about but never tried before.
Honestly, the results are not that good. But to me, trying new things is part of the fun.